what the feds are alleging in this indictment is that P. Diddy's organization, Bad Boy Entertainment, and he has Combs Enterprises. They were essentially like the mob, a criminal organization, and they dealt in drugs, sex trafficking, kidnapping, and obstruction of justice. So they're saying that this criminal organization, Combs's Bad Boy Entertainment and Combs Enterprises, were all one big criminal organization. So they're charging them under RICO. Now, if you're charging people under RICO, you have the organization, but then you have to have the illegal activity that this organization was doing to further the organization. So the criminal activity here they're going to be pointing to is essentially kidnapping, sex trafficking, and prostitution. So that's the criminal activity that they are going to that they're going to point to get to the RICO charge. All right. So the first issue was P. Diddy, did he lead a criminal organization? So the rule of law here is RICO. And RICO is, again, like I said, a person is engaging in legal activity with an organization. And here we're talking about RICO charges that deal with interstate commerce. So people are crossing state lines doing these illegal activities, such as trafficking, for instance, and kidnapping, which is what they're charging Diddy with. Kidnapping, trafficking. Now, the facts that the government are alleging that are leading to the RICO charges. They said Combs led and controlled business empire called Combs Enterprises, which includes companies like Bad Boy Entertainment and Combs Enterprises. Combs used resources, employees, and influence of the enterprise to facilitate and cover up crimes such as sex trafficking, forced labor, and obstruction of justice. We'll see how all that plays in a little later. From 2018 on, Combs, along with associates, engaged in illegal activities. These included coercing women into sex acts, using commercial sex workers, distributing narcotics, and threatening those who oppose them. And last but not least, employees of Combs businesses acted as intermediaries. Again, the criminal organization, his employees acted as intermediaries. And their own actions were facilitated by Combs to control over the organization. So they're saying that Bad Boy Industries, Combs, and all the people who are working for him this organization was essentially funneling, doing all these crimes for Combs, for Combs' sexual gratification, to make Combs money, and to keep Combs quiet. So all of these illegal things were happening for Combs and to keep this company going. And you can see it right here. Again, I'm back to the indictment. You can see it right here in the indictment. They specifically say the defendant abused, threatened, and coerced women and others around him to fulfill his sexual desires, protect his reputation, and conceal his conduct. So this is what they're talking about RICO. And now to do that, sex trafficking, forced labor, kidnapping, arson, bribery, and other stuff. The arson was for the bombing of the car. So we understand now what they're saying. They're saying all these businesses were actually a front for illegal activities and to keep them quiet and to do it. So it's kind of insane. I'm hoping this video stays monetized because we're saying a lot of the naughty words. Crazy how? Well, if these allegations aren't crazy, then I don't know what to tell you. So when you go through the indictment, they do speak about what led to them. But again, I'm going back to my breakdown. When you apply them, they're saying when you apply the facts that they have alleged to this, you'll see how when they go into something like the next section, sex trafficking, how the organization was sex trafficking women allegedly for Combs. So they're saying Combs Entertainment is a legal organization, and they were sex trafficking women for Combs Entertainment, and that's the illegal activity which makes it a RICO case. So Deshaun Combs engaged in sex trafficking by coercing women, and the federal government, this is the law, 18 USC 1591, and the feds say yes. And here are the allegations that led to the sex trafficking. First, Combs orchestrated events called freak-offs, where women were coerced into engaging in sexual activity with commercial sex workers. Those events were highly orchestrated and filmed. Now, how do we know this may be true? I'm just read through these. Combs provided narcotics to women, kept them under his control, and used violence and intimidation to assure compliance. You'll hear a little later about Combs carrying firearms around when he's making these threats. So they're saying, if I have a gun and I'm telling you to have sex with somebody, that's going to make you want to do it because, I am armed. He transported both women and sex workers, male sex workers, across state lines. That's what gives you the federal charges, and intentionally ensuring their participation in coerce drugs and threats. Um, and the enterprise and employees help facilitate. Again, you keep talking about enterprise employees because they're trying to say this is a corrupt organization, which is a requirement for RICO. Making travel arrangements and distributing drugs to victims. So the company, people who work for the company were doing that. That's what makes this a RICO case. For Combs, they're saying Combs involved in organizing, coercing women through these sex acts, and he's the person pointing the fingers through sex trafficking, violates state law, and all of these people were sex trafficked. The prostitutes were sex trafficked. Cassie was sex trafficked. And even though his employees were telling people to sex traffic these people, he was the one, they were doing it on his behalf. So I hope all that makes sense. They're talking, the next charge is forced labor. So people may be like, well, what do you mean forced labor? Well, now this specifically goes to the prostitutes or the sex workers. I keep saying prostitutes, but it's more appropriate to call them sex workers. So the sex workers would go and they would have sex for pay, right? They weren't being forced to do anything. I'll pay you X amount of money to have sex. But they're saying that sometimes the nature of what Combs was doing was forcing them to have sex against their will. And that gets you from the sex trafficking to now it gets you to forced labor, right? So I trafficked you for sex and I'm paying you. So that's whatever. And now you're having sex and you really don't want to. So now I'm forcing you to have sex, even though I'm paying you. So you get the forced labor, even though it's for a criminal act. So they called it off supplies. Let me show you these freak off supplies. So when they raided his home, they found all these freak off supplies. Shocking hotel in advance of freak off supplies, including controlled substances, baby oil, lubricants, blah, 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 right? So they sell those freak off supplies. But look at this. The freak off supplies included narcotics and more than 1,000 bottles of baby oil and lubricant. So this guy was like, what the hell? We're looking at, this is the detention memo. So in other words, this is the government saying why P. Diddy Combs should not get bail. Memo is insano stuff because it also has the guns with the serial numbers removed from them. It's fully ammo, the ammunition. Again, they were saying that these are the reasons why people were scared, right? You got guns without serial numbers, you got ammo, you're armed and all that stuff. And here at the bottom, they actually say here that, as set forth, the defendant poses an ongoing and significant danger to the community, has repeatedly engaged in obstructive conduct, and presents a serious risk of flight. The government respectfully submits that the defendant cannot meet his burden of overcoming the statutory presumption in favor of detention. In other words, you wouldn't hold him, but he got to overcome that. And right now he can't because look at all the stuff that we just presented. There is no condition of bail that would assure the appearance and compliance of the defendant. In other words, they're saying there's no amount of money that you can charge this billionaire and no condition that that's going to be an incentive enough for him to come back. And they're saying that he should be held without bail. Now, it's going to be tough for the government to win this because bail is not a punishment. It's to make sure that you can come back to court. And if it's a monetary, if it's money, then I believe he's going to get bail, but the government's asking that he should not get bail based on this document. So remember, we're talking about forced labor, which was the third charge. So the forced labor comes from, so we're looking for where he obtained labor services through threats of force and intimidation and coercion. So it says Combs, the government alleges that Combs compelled women to participate in sex performances, which can be considered labor of services. So the fact that he was getting these sex workers to do it, they're saying is labor, which is kind of weird because you think like, hey, sex work is illegal, but they're saying that, hey, it worked, and that's what they're using. And he's saying that those labor services, the sex work was obtained through violence, intimidation, and narcotics. Remember what we just heard from the Cassie lawsuit? That's what she was alleging. These acts were not consensual, but were enforced through threats to cut off financial support, emotional manipulation, and physical violence. So they're saying that, yes, the way he coerced the way he coerced, the way he intimidated was by holding back these financial benefits and this emotional and physical manipulation. And you saw Cassie was beaten when she didn't want to do what she tried to do. And then last, Combs used his power and influence within his businesses to coerce women into these acts. So there was, I'm a star, I'm going to coerce you to do these things. Then I'm going to pay you, making them dependent on him financially, and then pull back that financial support if you don't do what I say. So now think about this, people. I need people to really think about this. Think about this if you're in that position. You go to this company, you get this great job. He's paying you $300,000-$400,000 a year, whatever your great job is, right? You go and you're happy. And then he says, you want you to, and they want you to do this, want you to do this. And now he's got you doing sex acts and say, well, listen, right now you're not, you've traveled to, let's say, Timbuktu or wherever he's made you travel to. So you're in some foreign country. You're there with him. He's paid for you to get out there. He's got all your stuff. And now he tells you, well, if you don't do what I tell you to do, you're fired. That's, it's going to be tough for somebody to say no to not do what you're going to do. He's also holding guns, right? You're also drugged up. So the government's saying that the way he was doing all that led to this being forced labor. These people essentially had no choice but to do what he wanted them to do at this particular time. The forced participation in the freak-offs, remember the freak-offs we were just talking about with 1,000 bottles of oil, and other sexual acts can be classified as forced labor. As Combs used threats, drugs, and coercion, as we heard from Cassie, this satisfies the statutory requirement of using force or coercion to obtain services, and this is sexual services. So the conclusion is the fact that Combs forced women or allegedly forced women into these sexual acts by coercion would be as against their will is a violation of the law. So, and hopefully you guys can start seeing how the government has essentially telling a story to try to sell this to a jury. So the story is this is a corrupt organization, and this organization's corruption was based on drugs, sex trafficking, kidnapping, obstruction of justice, and a whole bunch of stuff. So they're saying the government is essentially alleging kidnapping because the government's saying, well, I mean, and I hate using Cassie for most of these examples, but her lawsuit essentially is like the foundation of this indictment. So Cassie, for instance, would say, I didn't want to leave New York, right? But he would force me to leave New York and go to Florida and be a part of these freak-offs. So if you're taking someone from one place against their will to another place, right, across state lines, it's kidnapping. So they've gotten her kidnapped. Now, also, kidnapping doesn't have to be I'm putting handcuffs on you and lock you up or lock you in the door. You can have kidnapping through coercion, through threats, through intimidation. You can kidnap someone without actually, because usually when you think about kidnapping, you think person all locked up and tied up and being kidnapped. But you can also kidnap in other ways, and I think the coercive piece of kidnapping is what the government is hanging on, right? These women didn't really have a choice to leave, even though they left. They could leave. They really didn't have a viable choice, especially let's say someone who's poor and you may have taken them to Mexico or something like that. And now they have no means to get home unless you pay for their ticket to get home. So, for example, the early morning hours of December 22nd, the defendant and co-conspirator kidnapped an individual at gunpoint to facilitate breaking into and entering into the residence of another individual. Wow. Multiple witnesses would testify at trial. So the government's saying we got multiple witnesses that are going to testify at trial to the events surrounding the kidnapping, break-in, and latter, which was corroborated by police reports and other official records. So they have them actually people at gunpoint.
Jesus.
Are hitting Combs with obstruction of justice. So did Sean Combs obstruct justice by bribing and intimidating witness? So the bribing and intimidation, if you get that, then it leads to obstruction of justice, right? While you're bribing, you're intimidating them not to testify, you're obstructing justice. And that obstruction of justice is when a person endeavors to influence, obstruct, or impede the due administration of justice, like intimidation, force, or bribery, or bribing witnesses. So because he got him bribing the guard to not, file charges or, go to law enforcement. And we have the intimidation of the sex workers in Cassie that gets you this obstruction of justice charge. And here are the facts that led to it. Combs attempted to bribe hotel security staff after the Cassie video in March. Witnesses of the violent acts of abuse were either intimidated or coerced into their silence, prevented them from reporting Combs' actions to law enforcement. Again, see, he was reporting it to the police, not reporting it in civil action. And Combs Enterprise worked actively to cover up his illegal activities, protecting them from legal consequences, paying people off, and all that stuff. Just get this up for the obstruction of justice. The application here, in other words, the facts, how they lead. So the government is saying that Combs' actions directly obstructed justice by him attempting to bribe witnesses and intimidate them into silence. The classic case of obstruction. His goal was to prevent witnesses from reporting his crimes and cooperating with authorities. So that's classic obstruction of justice. Go ahead.